Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, I'm excited to take you on a journey through public policy, politics, analysis, and alternatives, a book that dives deep into the heart of public policy making, analysis, and its real-world implications. Now, let me make one thing clear. This isn't just a textbook. It's a comprehensive guide designed to help us understand how governments address public problems, why they make certain decisions, and most importantly, how we as citizens can evaluate and even influence those decisions. Over the course of this session, I'll walk you through the 4 main parts of the book. We'll start with what public policy is, the role of politics, and the institutions involved. Then, we'll move into the art and science of policy analysis, understanding how we evaluate problems and weigh the options. Next, we'll explore key policy areas like healthcare, education, the economy, the environment, and even homeland security, where theory meets practice in the most critical ways. Finally, we'll tie it all together with a discussion about how policy choices are made, how they impact our lives, and how citizens like us can get involved in shaping them. But this isn't just about me explaining concepts. It's about understanding why this book is important in today's world. It provides us with tools to critically analyze issues like climate change, inequality, and security, and to see how politics and values shape decisions. So, buckle up. I promise to guide you step by step through this incredible resource so that by the end, you'll not only understand what this book is about, you'll see how its lessons apply to the world around us. Let's begin. What do you think about this video? Leave a comment below. All right. Let's dive into the first section of Part 1, what public policy is, the role of politics, and the institutions involved. So, what exactly is public policy? At its core, public policy is what governments decide to do or not to do about issues that affect society. Think of it as the government's response to public problems like environmental challenges, healthcare access, or public safety. It's not just about laws or regulations, it's about actions or inactions that aim to solve or address these problems. Now, here's where politics steps in. Politics is the driving force behind how policies are created. It's all about power and influence. Who gets to decide what issues matter, whose interests are prioritized, and how conflicts over values like freedom, equality, or security are resolved. For example, debates over climate policy often come down to conflicts between economic interests and environmental concerns. Politics determines how those conflicts are navigated. Finally, we have the institutions that make it all happen. In the United States, this involves Congress, the president, federal agencies, and the courts at the federal level, alongside state and local governments. These institutions play unique but interconnected roles in shaping, implementing, and evaluating public policy. For example, while Congress might pass a law, agencies like the EPA or the Department of Health and Human Services carry it out, and the courts ensure it aligns with the Constitution. Understanding these 3 elements, policy, politics, and institutions, is crucial because they form the foundation of how decisions are made. By the end of this chapter, you'll see how the dynamic interaction between them shapes the policies that impact our lives every day. Let's keep going. Now, let's move to the second bullet in Part 1, the role of government institutions and policy actors. When we talk about public policy, it's essential to understand who's actually making the decisions and how the system works. This is where government institutions and key policy actors come into play. First, let's look at government institutions. In the US, we operate within a system of federalism, meaning power is shared between the federal government and state governments. At the federal level, we have 3 key branches. The legislative branch, Congress, makes the laws. The executive branch, led by the president and supported by federal agencies, implements and enforces those laws. The judicial branch, the courts, ensures that laws and policies are constitutional. Each branch has a role, but they often work together or clash, depending on political agendas and priorities. Add to that the states, which have their own legislatures, governors, and courts, and you see just how complex policymaking can be. Now, let's talk about policy actors. These aren't just the people in government, far from it. Policy actors include interest groups like environmental organizations or labor unions, the media, nonprofits, and of course, us, the citizens. These actors influence public policy in many ways, from lobbying and advocacy to shaping public opinion. Take, for example, the role of public opinion. Politicians often craft their policies based on what the majority of people support, or at least what they think will win votes. At the same time, interest groups in the media play a powerful role in framing issues and swaying public sentiment. Understanding how these institutions and actors interact helps us see why some policies are adopted while others stall. It also shows us where we, as citizens, can have the most impact. So in summary, public policy is shaped not just by what government institutions do, but also by the influence of key actors both inside and outside of government. Keep this in mind as we explore how these dynamics play out in different policy areas later in the book. Let's move forward. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing to this channel to encourage me to make videos like this in the future. Now let's dive into the third section of Part 1, Understanding Public Policymaking. This section answers an important question. How exactly does public policy get made? It's not as simple as a single decision or a quick vote. It's a process, and understanding this process is key to seeing how change happens. At the core of this section are theories of policymaking. Scholars have developed different ways to explain how policy decisions are made. For example, elite theory suggests that policies are driven by a small group of powerful individuals or institutions, like corporations or wealthy donors. Group theory focuses on how competing interest groups push their agendas to influence decisions. Rational choice theory assumes that individuals and policymakers make decisions based on logic and self-interest. Political systems theory shows how policies are shaped by the interaction between society, government institutions, and external pressures. But theories aside, the book emphasizes a practical model, the policy process model, which breaks policymaking into 6 key steps. 1. Problem definition and agenda setting. This is where an issue is recognized and brought to the government's attention. For example, climate change became a policy priority because of public pressure and scientific evidence. 2. Policy formulation. Here, solutions and proposals are developed. Think of lawmakers drafting a bill or experts offering recommendations. 3. Policy legitimation. This is the formal adoption of a policy, like Congress passing a law or a government agency issuing a regulation. 4. Policy implementation. Once adopted, policies are carried out. This often involves government agencies like the EPA or Department of Education. 5. Policy evaluation. Policymakers assess whether the policy is achieving its goals. If not, adjustments might be needed. 6. Policy change. If evaluations reveal flaws or new priorities arise, the policy is revisited and modified. Finally, this section highlights the tools of policymaking, such as regulation, taxation, education campaigns, or subsidies. These tools help governments steer behavior or solve problems. In essence, this chapter helps us understand that policymaking isn't just about the outcome. It's a dynamic and ongoing process, influenced by theories, steps, and tools. By breaking it down, we can see where change starts and where we as citizens can get involved. Let's keep going. Do you like this video? If you do, please like and subscribe to my channel. Let's now step into Part 2, starting with its first section, Policy Analysis and Introduction. Policy analysis is the heart of understanding public problems and evaluating solutions. This section lays out what it is, why it's important, and how to do it effectively. At its core, policy analysis is about breaking down a problem to understand it better and finding the best course of action. Imagine being a detective. Your job is to gather evidence, weigh different options, and predict the consequences of each choice. That's what policy analysts do, whether they're tackling healthcare reform, environmental issues, or budgetary policies. This section introduces us to the steps in the policy analysis process, which provide a clear roadmap. 1. Define and analyze the problem. The first step is to clearly identify the problem. For example, if we're dealing with rising healthcare costs, we need to ask, what's causing it? Who is most affected? What are the long-term risks? 2. Construct policy alternatives. Next, you brainstorm possible solutions. Should the government introduce new regulations, provide subsidies, or maybe try a hybrid approach? 3. Choose evaluative criteria. Here's where things get analytical. What criteria will we use to judge these options? Common ones include effectiveness, efficiency, equity, and ethics. 4. Assess the alternatives. Once you have your options and criteria, you evaluate them. Which solution is most effective? Which is politically feasible? What are the trade-offs? 5. Draw conclusions. Finally, you recommend a course of action based on your analysis. The section also dives into the types of policy analysis. Scientific approaches focus on objectivity and long-term solutions. Professional approaches are about practical, short-term fixes. Political approaches emphasize strategies that align with political realities. The beauty of policy analysis is that it equips us to tackle even the toughest problems with a structured, logical approach. It's not about guessing. It's about using evidence, critical thinking, and creativity to find solutions that work. By the end of this section, you'll understand that policy analysis is not just for government officials or academics. It's a tool anyone can use to evaluate the choices that shape our lives. Ready to dive deeper? Let's move on. Now, let's explore the second section of Part 2, Public Problems and Policy Alternatives. This section is all about how we understand public problems and, more importantly, how we come up with creative and effective solutions. It starts by tackling a crucial question. What makes something a public problem? Not every issue qualifies. Public problems are conditions the public and policymakers broadly agree need intervention, like poverty, climate change, or rising healthcare costs. The first step is problem analysis. This involves asking the right questions. What's causing the problem? Who's affected and how? What evidence exists to support or challenge our assumptions about it? For example, if we're analyzing traffic congestion, we'd look at urban planning, commuting patterns, and public transportation. Without understanding the problem clearly, any solution will likely miss the mark. Next, this section emphasizes the importance of constructing policy alternatives, or simply put, brainstorming solutions. This part is where creativity meets practicality. The book gives us tools like policy typologies, which categorize what governments can do. 1. Regulation, setting rules like emission standards. 2. Taxing and spending, using financial incentives or penalties such as tax breaks for renewable energy. 3. Government management, directly providing services like public schools or national defense. 4. Education and persuasion, informing the public to change behavior like anti-smoking campaigns. This section also encourages thinking outside the box. Sometimes the best solutions aren't obvious. They require innovative approaches or combinations of strategies. For instance, tackling homelessness might involve not only building affordable housing, but also providing mental health services and job training. Finally, this chapter stresses the need to evaluate whether these alternatives are realistic. Policymakers must consider political feasibility, economic constraints, and public support. A great idea that's impossible to implement won't solve anything. In summary, this section is all about bridging the gap between identifying problems and proposing actionable solutions. It's a guide for turning analysis into action and making sure that action addresses the root of the problem effectively. Let's keep moving forward. Let's dive into the third section of Part 2, Assessing Policy Alternatives. This section is where the book teaches us how to evaluate different policy options and decide which one is the best. Once we've identified a problem and brainstormed solutions, the real challenge begins. How do we choose the most effective, fair, and feasible option? First, we learn about evaluative criteria, the standards we use to judge policy proposals. The book highlights the most common criteria. Effectiveness. Will the policy solve the problem? For example, does a proposed renewable energy policy actually reduce emissions? Efficiency. Is it cost-effective? Are we getting the most benefit for the resources spent? Equity. Is it fair? Does it address the needs of different groups, especially the most vulnerable? Ethics and political values. Is it morally acceptable? Does it align with societal values? After setting these criteria, the book introduces us to methods of policy analysis, which are tools to evaluate alternatives. 1. Economic approaches. Tools like cost-benefit analysis, which compares the costs of a policy to its potential benefits, and risk assessment, which measures potential harms. 2. Forecasting and impact assessment, predicting the future consequences of a policy and understanding its potential effects on society. For instance, what would happen to traffic patterns if a new highway is built? 3. Political feasibility analysis, asking whether the policy is likely to gain support from lawmakers, interest groups, and the public. This section also acknowledges that no policy is perfect. Every option involves trade-offs, and the challenge lies in balancing competing priorities. For example, a policy might be highly effective but very expensive. Can we justify the cost? Finally, the book emphasizes ethical analysis, reminding us that good policymaking isn't just about solving problems efficiently, it's also about doing what's right. Issues like privacy, justice, and fairness must always be part of the conversation. In summary, this section equips us with a structured approach to evaluating policy alternatives. It shows us how to think critically and make informed decisions that weigh effectiveness, efficiency, equity, and ethics. It's the toolkit we need to move from ideas to impactful action. Let's keep going. Now, let's move into part 3, starting with the first section, economic and budgetary policy. This section dives into one of the most critical areas of public policy, how governments manage the economy and allocate resources. At its core, economic and budgetary policy is about balancing competing goals: economic growth, employment, price stability, and managing government debt. The book starts by explaining the goals of economic policy, which include promoting economic growth, ensuring businesses thrive and people have jobs, keeping unemployment low, supporting workers and reducing joblessness, maintaining low inflation, preventing the cost of goods and services from rising too quickly, managing deficits and debt, controlling government spending to avoid long-term financial instability. Next, it introduces the tools of economic policy. 1. Fiscal policy, the government's use of taxation and spending to influence the economy. For example, tax cuts can stimulate consumer spending, while public investments in infrastructure can create jobs. 2. Monetary policy, managed by the Federal Reserve. This involves controlling the money supply and interest rates to stabilize the economy. 3. Regulation and incentives, policies like subsidies, tax credits, and regulations designed to encourage or restrict certain economic behaviors. A big part of this section is about the federal budget process. It explains how the government plans its spending, from initial proposals by agencies to congressional reviews and approvals. You'll learn how budget decisions impact everything from education funding to military spending. Finally, this section explores current challenges and controversies, like income inequality, the growing cost of entitlement programs, e.g., Social Security and Medicare, and debates over how to address the national debt. It even looks at recent examples, like responses to economic crises, to show how policymakers balance competing priorities. In summary, this section provides a comprehensive overview of how governments shape the economy, why budgeting matters, and the trade-offs involved in making economic policy decisions. It's the foundation for understanding one of the most impactful areas of public policy. Let's keep moving. Let's move to the second section of Part 3, healthcare policy. This section tackles one of the most debated and impactful areas of public policy, healthcare. It explores how the U.S. healthcare system works, its strengths and weaknesses, and the challenges policymakers face in ensuring access to quality care for everyone. First, the book provides a brief history of healthcare policy in the U.S., showing how it has evolved into a hybrid system of public and private care. Programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act, ACA, are explained as key components of the public side, while private insurance and providers dominate much of the system. Next, it delves into major challenges. Rising costs. The U.S. spends more on healthcare than any other nation, but outcomes don't always reflect that investment. Why? Factors like expensive treatments, administrative costs, and high prescription drug prices. The uninsured. Millions of Americans remain without coverage, leading to worse health outcomes and higher costs for emergency care. Quality of care. From medical errors to unequal access, ensuring consistent quality remains a major issue. The book also examines state-level innovations in healthcare policy, such as attempts to regulate prescription drugs, expand Medicaid, or adopt single-payer systems. These experiments show how states can act as laboratories for national solutions. Finally, this section includes key debates in healthcare policy, like, should there be greater emphasis on preventive care to reduce long-term costs? How can we control prescription drug prices without stifling innovation? What's the best way to balance efficiency, equity, and ethics in healthcare delivery? In summary, this section paints a detailed picture of the U.S. healthcare system's complexities. It doesn't just describe the problems, it challenges readers to think critically about solutions, from expanding coverage to reforming payment systems. Healthcare touches everyone, and this chapter helps us see the policy decisions shaping its future. Let's continue. Now, let's turn our attention to the third section of Part 3, Welfare and Social Security Policy. This section addresses two crucial areas of public policy that directly impact millions of Americans: poverty alleviation and income security. It begins by exploring the history and structure of the welfare system and Social Security, highlighting their roles in supporting vulnerable populations and providing a safety net. First, the book examines poverty in America, its causes, consequences, and how the government has responded. Programs like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF, and Earned Income Tax Credit, EITC, are discussed as tools to help low-income families meet their basic needs. However, it also critiques these programs, raising questions about their effectiveness and whether they provide enough support to lift people out of poverty. Next, the focus shifts to Social Security, the largest and most popular federal program. Social Security provides income to retirees, disabled individuals, and survivors of deceased workers, and has been a cornerstone of income security since its creation in 1935. The book highlights the growing challenges facing Social Security, including changing demographics. With more retirees and fewer workers paying into the system, funding has become a pressing issue. Financial sustainability. Policymakers must decide how to ensure Social Security remains solvent, whether by raising taxes, reducing benefits, or other reforms. The section also dives into the welfare reform debates. It discusses the 1996 overhaul that replaced traditional welfare programs with TANF, which emphasizes work requirements and state control. The book evaluates whether these reforms have succeeded in reducing poverty or if they've created new challenges, such as leaving families behind during economic downturns. Finally, the book asks readers to grapple with ethical and practical questions, such as, should welfare programs focus more on short-term relief or long-term poverty reduction? How can we balance individual responsibility with the need to protect society's most vulnerable? What reforms are needed to ensure Social Security's survival for future generations? In summary, this section provides a comprehensive look at how the U.S. tackles poverty and income security, while challenging us to think critically about how these systems can be improved to better serve the public. Let's keep moving. Let's move on to the fourth section of Part 3, Education Policy. This section examines one of the most important areas of public policy, education, which shapes the future of individuals and society as a whole. It explores the challenges, reforms, and debates surrounding how we educate the next generation. First, the book discusses the major problems facing education today. These include funding disparities. Schools in wealthier areas often have far more resources than those in low-income communities, leading to unequal opportunities for students. Quality concerns. Issues like teacher shortages, low salaries, outdated curricula, and poor infrastructure often hinder educational outcomes. Separation of church and state. Ongoing debates about funding for religious schools and policies like school prayer continue to stir controversy. Next, it dives into education policy reforms that have been proposed or implemented to address these challenges. These include merit pay and teacher standards, rewarding high-performing teachers and raising qualification standards to improve teaching quality, school choice and charter schools, allowing parents to choose where their children go to school, whether it's through vouchers, charter schools, or other options. Standardized testing, using tests to measure student achievement and hold schools accountable, though this remains highly debated. The section also tackles issues in higher education, such as affordability. Rising tuition costs and the burden of student loan debt have sparked calls for reform, including free college programs and expanded financial aid. Access and equity, ensuring that underrepresented groups, including low-income students and minorities, have equal opportunities to pursue higher education. Finally, the book includes a focused discussion on the balance between cost and value in education. It challenges readers to think about how we can ensure education remains accessible and affordable while delivering the skills and knowledge needed in a modern economy. In summary, this section provides a comprehensive look at the complexities of education policy, from K-12 funding to higher education reform. It encourages us to think critically about how to create a fair and effective education system that meets the needs of all students. Let's continue exploring. Let's now explore the fifth section of Part 3, Environmental and Energy Policy. This section tackles two of the most urgent and complex challenges of our time: protecting the environment and managing energy resources. It examines how governments address these interconnected issues and the political, economic, and ethical debates they generate. The section begins with the evolution of environmental policy in the U.S., highlighting key moments like the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and landmark laws such as the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. It also discusses how the environmental movement brought these issues to the forefront of policymaking. Next, it dives into the conflicts in environmental policy. While early efforts focused on consensus-based solutions, modern debates are much more contentious. For example, how do we balance environmental protection with economic growth? Should industries bear stricter regulations, even if it increases costs for businesses and consumers? The section also covers energy policy, which is closely tied to environmental concerns. It examines how the U.S. has managed its energy resources over time, from reliance on fossil fuels to the growing push for renewable energy sources like wind and solar. The book discusses key energy policy questions, such as how can we transition to cleaner energy while ensuring energy security and affordability? Should the government provide subsidies for renewable energy, or should the market decide? A major focus of this section is climate change, one of the defining challenges of the 21st century. The book explores policy options to address it, such as carbon taxes, cap-and-trade programs, and international agreements like the Paris Climate Accord. It also highlights the political and ethical dimensions of these decisions, including the responsibilities of developed nations versus developing nations in reducing emissions, how climate policies impact vulnerable communities. In summary, this section helps us understand the complexities of creating policies that balance environmental sustainability, energy needs, and economic considerations. It challenges us to think critically about solutions to these global issues and how governments, industries, and citizens can work together to address them. Let's move on. Now, let's dive into the sixth and final section of Part 3, Foreign Policy and Homeland Security. This section shifts focus to the international stage, exploring how the U.S. engages with the world through foreign policy and how it protects itself at home through homeland security. These policies are vital for national safety, global leadership, and the promotion of American interests abroad. The section starts by tracing the evolution of U.S. foreign policy, highlighting key moments such as the post-World War II era, including the Marshall Plan and the formation of NATO, the Cold War, which shaped military strategies and alliances, modern globalization and its impact on trade, diplomacy, and international relations. The book also examines key tools of foreign policy, including economic and military aid, how the U.S. provides support to other nations to advance its strategic interests. Diplomacy, negotiations and alliances to maintain global stability. Military power, the role of defense and intelligence agencies in addressing global threats. On the homeland security side, the book dives into post-9/11 challenges, such as combating terrorism and ensuring national safety. It explores issues like transportation security, policies to protect air travel and critical infrastructure, domestic surveillance, balancing security needs with civil liberties, particularly with agencies like the NSA. A key focus of this section is the ongoing debate over civil liberties in the age of terrorism. The book challenges readers to think critically about questions like, how much privacy should citizens sacrifice for safety? Are certain measures, like warrantless surveillance, justified in the name of national security? Lastly, the section considers future challenges in foreign policy and homeland security, such as cybersecurity threats and the rise of cyber warfare, managing relations with rising powers like China, and addressing global crises like climate-induced migration. In summary, this section provides a comprehensive view of how the U.S. navigates global challenges while ensuring safety at home. It highlights the tough choices policymakers face in balancing security, ethics, and international cooperation. Let's move forward to wrap up Part 3. Now, let's dive into the final part of the book, Part 4, Conclusions. This part ties everything together, focusing on politics, analysis, and policy choice, the grand finale of what we've learned so far. It reflects on the policymaking process and provides insights into how citizens and policymakers navigate the complex world of public policy. The key theme here is decision-making in public policy. The book emphasizes that making policy decisions is not just about analysis and logic. It's also deeply political. Conflicting interests, values, and priorities make policymaking a balancing act between what is feasible, ethical, and effective. One of the big topics in this section is policy conflicts and incrementalism. Instead of sweeping changes, most policies evolve in small steps shaped by compromise, political realities, and limited resources. For example, rather than completely overhauling the healthcare system, reforms like the Affordable Care Act build on what already exists. Another highlight is citizen participation and engagement. The book stresses the importance of public involvement in the policymaking process. Whether it's voting, advocacy, or public consultation, engaged citizens can shape policies that better reflect the needs and values of the community. This section explores new and emerging forms of civic participation, like online platforms and grassroots movements, which are changing how people interact with government. Finally, the chapter closes with a look at the future of public policy. It challenges us to think about the big questions. How do we address global issues like climate change, inequality, and technological disruption? How can we make policy decisions that are inclusive, forward-thinking, and sustainable? In essence, this part of the book reminds us that policymaking is not just the job of politicians and analysts. It's something we all have a stake in. By understanding the process and actively engaging, we can help shape policies that improve our world. This concludes our overview of the book. Let's reflect on how all these insights come together to give us a clearer understanding of public policy. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing to this channel to encourage me to make videos like this in the future.